to match certain dates to the event that happened on that day. Or I would have to match the title of a person to their name and things like that. So growing up, I really was not, like I mentioned, fond of social studies. So it may come as a surprise to some of my teachers from when I was in elementary school that I'm actually teaching social studies now. But the great thing about it is, I think now we have come to an age where social studies no longer has to mean having to memorize. And although I know that there are still um, some who practice it that way, I hope that this is something we actually change for the better. So, um, yeah, a lot of social studies, especially if you're teaching things like history, really does rely on facts, and we can't take that away. We have to know those people, we have to know those events and those places and those dates, and that's just a part of it. But I think the common misconception is that we have to test how much our students know these things. And so we have them memorize these facts. We have them regurgitate the information when they take their assessments. And when we look at it, what do our students achieve when we have them memorize these things? So, yeah, they do know this information. They know the names of people, historical figures, they know the names of places, the dates of certain events in our history. But at the end of the day, what have they achieved by memorizing it? Okay, so let's take a look. We have to go back to our objectives. When we ask our students to memorize this information, are we able or are they able to meet the objectives that we've set for our lesson and for the subject? Are they able to develop the skills that they need, the skills to think um, beyond the box, the skill to be able to justify themselves or share their opinions or listen to the opinions of others? Are they able to draw patterns from the events that we've discussed? So, will memorization be able to help them develop those skills that we want them to have? Skills that hopefully they'll be able to use when they grow up and start working or applying these different things to, their profession or whatever it is that they end up doing. Will memorization help them develop critical thinking? Will it allow them to be critical of the things that they experience, of the things that they see around us? And will it help them develop attitudes that we want them to foster? Values. Will it help them develop honesty? Will it help them develop responsibility and truthfulness and all of these different things, integrity? So, memorization really, I find, oftentimes does not meet these particular criteria. So, although maybe they will meet some of our objectives wherein the students will become familiar with certain terms or certain names and all of these things, all of these facts, when we go to the other things, it might not be able to actually develop those in our students as much. So, memorization is really nothing more than rote learning. A student can memorize perhaps a whole book. He can memorize everything in it, but at the end of the day, what would he have achieved? Aside from being able to give facts or tell us the names of certain people or tell us what happened in certain events. Is that really the bottom line of social studies? Is that really what we want to achieve in the subject for them, just to be able to know these facts? So, what we want to do now is, instead of having them just focus on memorizing these things, we want them to move beyond that. We want them to be able to develop the skills that they'll need, to develop critical thinking, and practice and foster in themselves these different attitudes and values that they will be applying in their day to day lives. So, we want to go beyond memorization and we want to provide more authentic learning experiences for students. And by doing that, it can actually help the subject become more enjoyable and more relatable for students. And the more relatable it is to them, the better they will remember. Okay, so what we want to focus on is more of relevance and authenticity in learning. And how do we do that? So I have a couple of practices that I think will be very helpful to take note of when we teach our subjects in social studies. So first is to relate the lesson to student experiences and interests. Like I said, the more relevant it is to them, the more that they can relate to what we're talking about, the easier it will be for them to remember that. So, for example, if we were talking about cultural things in the Philippines, our culture, we can talk to our students about possibly the provinces they've come from. What are the traditions they have in their families? What places have they been to in the Philippines? So, by talking to them about experiences that they've had, it helps them understand better the lesson. And then we can also draw from their interests. Perhaps our students are very creative, so we can have creative projects that will help them discover more about a particular topic. Or if they are more active students, younger students tend to be more active, we can have them do something like a scavenger hunt or an activity where they would go around a particular place and gather information from it. So we have to relate it to their experiences so that they understand it better. Another thing we can do is to integrate news and current events. So for us, our usual practice is in every lesson, we will usually integrate a piece of news that is related to the topic. So for example, I teach grade 4 social studies. We teach about government, so there's so much to draw from there. Okay, actually, social studies as a subject is so rich in resources, particularly in this area of news and current events, because part of social studies is really drawing from those things going on around us in our society. So, whatever topic you have, I guarantee that there will be some form of news and current events that you can insert into it. For us, as early as grade 3, we usually introduce short articles to our students already. And what you can do here is you can start off by introducing to them first the different parts of a news article: the title, the author, the source, and then the body of the news. And then we can tell it to them like a story or report it to them like an actual news report. And then have our students draw information from that news or piece of current event. And then from there, we can connect it to our lessons. And so these concepts that we're teaching them are not just abstract things that they have to imagine, but they are able to see concrete examples of it. An example here, like I mentioned, I teach grade 4 social studies. One of the topics we have is about territory. And we are aware of like the territorial disputes that the Philippines encounters. So what we do is we talk about that news, we talk about those current events, and then we have students look at these issues that we are facing related to this particular topic. And it not only makes them more interested in the topic and helps them understand it better, but it also allows them to be more aware of what's going on around them. And in that way, we're also teaching them to be responsible and alert citizens. And we're building in them that habit of learning about the news or listening to the news and learning about what's going on around them in their environment and staying up to date with these kinds of things. So this is another good practice that we can do. We have so many resources now for news. We have the internet, we have newspapers, magazines. So we can draw from all of these. But as teachers, of course, I encourage us to be very mindful also of where we source our information in our news. Next is to invite experts. So If you would know any experts in that particular field or topic that you were discussing, you can try inviting them over to discuss the lesson with your students. So instead of you discussing it to them, why not ask somebody who has firsthand experience in that area to talk to the students, and then allow your students to ask them questions. Okay, so most likely they will be better equipped to answer those questions that students might have about the topic because they are in that field. So, going back to what I said about the government, you could invite maybe some local government officials who can talk to the students. Or if you're going to be discussing culture, you can discuss, or you can invite, for example, maybe some people from the NCCA, or also if you would know any indigenous groups who are willing to, visit your school and talk about their experiences, their traditions, and things like that. That would be a great experience for your students because they're getting information and firsthand accounts from the people themselves. Another example here would be, for example, if you're going to talk about martial law or the Marcos administration, and you could invite people from that particular time to talk about their experiences and what happened during that time. So there's so many different things that we can do here. And then now with technology, it's a great way for us to reach out to other people. So I know that in high school, there's more of world history and Asian history. And while we can get experts from our own country, some professors from universities or schools, we can also invite people from other countries. It's as easy now as reaching out to them, and then we can make use of technology to maybe do a Skype call or a Zoom call so that they can talk to our students, and then our students can ask them questions. So going beyond the classroom and allowing people who are experts in the field or who have firsthand experience in the matter allow our students really to learn more about the topic, and it's not just coming from us. Because although we may know certain things about or know certain information about these topics, it's always better to get them from people who actually have experience in it. And it feels more authentic to the students as well because they know that these are people who were actually there. Another is to maximize our community resources. So if you have, for example, maybe a library, local public library, you can take your students there. Maybe, these different places in our communities, in our cities, in our towns that we can go to and have our students see what certain things are like. So if you're going to talk about local governance, for example, you can take your students perhaps to City Hall and have them see how people work there. What are the different things that go on? What are the different projects that the local governments take care of? Okay, so let's try to maximize what we have in our communities instead of just presenting them with examples through pictures and videos. If we can take them to those places. Right now, of course, this is not ideal because of the pandemic, but hopefully afterwards, when things go back a little more to normal, we'll be able to actually do this and maximize those different places that we can go to in our community. Even in school, for example, you can also maximize what you have in school, in your school. So let's say if you're going to be talking about community helpers, maybe you can invite some teachers or different people from that particular community to talk about what they do, maybe firemen, librarians, all these different people. So there, you maximize what you have around you. And then another great thing you can try is to try role playing, simulations, and hands on activities. This is for younger students, I find that they enjoy learning more when they are actively involved in the learning process. So, meaning they're not just sitting and listening to you talk, or they're not just watching something, but they're actually doing something themselves. They are discovering things on their own, or they are using their hands, their bodies to actually learn about something new. So, hands on activities are really great for them. Simulations, we have so many um, technology or technological devices now and applications and programs that allow us to present certain simulations to our students. And then if you don't have the technology available, you can also try role playing. So let's say, for example, if you're going to be discussing about a historical event, you could ask your students to role play that event. And because they're actively doing it, because they are presenting it in this active way and not just reporting it by reading something, they're in that moment and they feel the role that they are in, and so they get to know that person, that historical figure, a little more, and maybe even get to know the event a little more. And because they're doing that, it sticks with them even more, and it's easier for them to remember it. They don't have to memorize it, because since they're saying the lines and they're doing these certain actions, they'll be able to remember it a lot easier. So role playing can be done. Um, Role playing is actually also a good way to have students learn how to look at the different perspectives of people. So oftentimes we only look at our own perspectives when it comes to certain matters, or when it's something related to history. Our perspective is that of a spectator or a viewer or someone listening to the story. But if they role play and they are in the character or in the position of a certain person, a certain historical figure, for example, then they get to understand a little better what the experiences of that person was, what they went through, and what were those things that they had to do to achieve something. So I think this is a good practice that we can do. You have to make time for it, of course, but it's worth it usually. And very important also is to ask questions that promote higher order thinking. Like I mentioned, growing up, usually social studies focused on questions like when, who, what, and where. And while those questions are essential and they are good for building up to other um, thoughts or other higher order thinking skills, we really need to focus a lot more on the whys and hows. Okay, so let's move beyond having students memorize dates and names of people and events and places. And let's focus more on what are the lessons they can get from that. What are the lessons they can get from the life experiences of a certain historical figure? What are the lessons they can learn from a certain event in our history? Okay, remember that adage, which is uh, if you don't know the history, then you're doomed to repeat it. So while it's good for students to know the events and know what happened, we also need to have them realize why those things happen or how they happen and what were the effects of that. So let's have a shift now to deeper questions, or to questions that promote deeper thinking in them and higher order thinking skills. And what we can do to promote that is we can shift our questions to different kinds of questions. So instead of asking, let's say, for example, what happened during this particular historical event, we could ask for opinions. For example, do you think this historical figure did the right thing during that time? Or could he have done it in a different way? Or you could also ask which side they're on in a particular conflict, or what their opinion is or what their opinions are on certain matters. And when we ask for their opinions, It allows students to really dig deeper into themselves and talk about their own personal experiences and their own personal thoughts instead of them just repeating information to us that we've taught to them. We can actually get to know our students a lot better and get to know a lot better the way they're thinking by the way that they express their opinions and also by the way they explain it. So we always have to seek explanations from our students. When they answer a yes or no question, we should not be satisfied with them just saying yes or saying no. We should seek explanations from them. Let's find out why they said yes, why they said no, why they agree, or why they disagree. By having our students explain these things, they're also able to practice being able to draw information and relate the information from what they've learned to their own personal experiences and their own personal opinions. And they can use that information to justify their stance. And we're teaching them now to use information in a way that is productive, in a way that allows them to support certain ideas or certain principles. And it will become a deeper practice of thinking. It's not just them saying yes, I agree, or no, I disagree, and ending it there. So by doing this, we are helping develop individuals who can think on their own and use information to support what they believe in. Okay, and then lastly, we can also promote inference. So we can present, for example, information to them, and then we can ask them, what do you think could be the effect of this particular action? Um, let's say, for example, if you talk about the environment and or the experiences of our indigenous tribes, their land is being taken away from them. So we can ask our students, what will be the effect to these people if their land is taken away from them? For younger students, you could ask or you could start by asking them to put themselves in the shoes of those people and ask them, how would you feel about it? What do you think those people feel? How do you think it will affect them in their lives? So we allow them to think beyond the information that we provide to them. We allow them to um, infer, and we also allow them to hypothesize about the possible effects of certain actions that we're doing or the effects of certain patterns in our communities. So, by practicing these types of questions or asking your students these types of questions instead of the usual what, where, who, and when, then we're really helping them develop those higher order thinking skills. And in the future, they'll be able to use those skills, to defend their stances, to defend their principles. And then also, it will allow them to get them to kind of understand the message of certain events in our history. Instead of just talking about what happened, they can talk about why it happened. They can talk about what were the underlying issues behind that event. Why did it lead to that? And what were the effects on us? So, yeah. This is something I practice with my students. And for us, I usually do a lot of the role playing, a lot of the asking these types of questions, asking them for their opinions, and asking them to explain themselves. And I find that it's really helpful in helping them really develop that way of thinking wherein they know that it's not just about memorization, but it's more about understanding. So it's one thing to know about something and another thing to understand it. Whenever my students ask me if they need to memorize certain terms or concepts, I always say no. You don't have to memorize it, but you do have to understand it. And that's a different thing because mostly I look for application. I want them to apply what they've learned. apply it to their actual lives, apply it to their actual experiences, and apply it to what they see is going around them instead of just knowing what happened. And so it's really more about that. We really want to shift the focus from having students memorize terms and concepts and names and dates to having a better understanding of why we're trying to learn these things, the lessons behind them. So, yeah, I hope that that has given you some ideas of how you can transform your social studies classes to accommodate for deeper thinking in your students and more authentic experiences for them, which are more meaningful as well. Okay, so